Hey, and welcome back to DriveDriverDriven and the Blunicorn Ultima Evolution build. My name is Humble, and as you can see behind me, it's a little cleaner than it used to be. I went and dumped off a bunch of cardboard that happens when you unpack a bunch of gear. So got rid of a bunch of cardboard, moved the body around, moved some of the body under the car, and we've had a couple deliveries. So very obviously, this is the LS7 motor that will be going into the car. This is a crate engine from GM Performance. I got some sheet aluminum there and another 4x8 sheet on the wall. And the goal there is to put an under tray in this part of the car before we put it on the ground. And I also want to put in an additional not really a firewall, but just a windbreak on this section of the chassis, because the radiator sits here, and then all of the air coming out of the radiator comes up into this area, and normally there's a shroud here that catches most of the air, but since this is a high pressure area of the car, just having this additional windbreak really helps keep most of the air from getting into the cabin, because you can see little gaps here and here that still need to be taken care of. And I'm not sure what to do with this opening around the steering shaft. I may just leave that open, but again, that's just air that can blow into the cabin itself. Let's see, I still haven't fastened the luggage pods, but I think I'm going to do that today, as well as fit these support sheets underneath. And wiring continues, although more of the harness is labeled. As you can see, I'm chasing circuits with my handy voltometer and trying to figure out what goes to where. But I think over half the harness is labeled now. I still have to tie it down and figure out the routing for everything, but I think that's becoming clearer and clearer once I get all the termination labeled. So today I want to try and get these side pods mounted. We're going to temporarily fit the side pods, and then I'll determine the fuel tank final location, because it can set the depth this way, and then I'll get it riveted. And so we'll have the luggage pods riveted on, we'll have the fuel tanks riveted in, and we'll have the side pod temporarily fitted on the car, and then likewise for the other side, and then maybe even get this panel cut and fitted. Look at that, starting to look like a car almost. So I've got the side pod temporarily mounted on the car. You can see where I had to clearance it around the radiator pipe. The luggage pods are fully riveted in now. The fuel tanks are still temporarily mounted, but let's see if I can show you this. You can see the mount down there, and there's one at the back you can barely see. What I needed to do was I have to get this side pod on to see how it lines up with the flange on the fuel tank here, because these two pieces rivet together. So this panel needs to come, well, this panel doesn't move. However, the fuel tank goes this way against it. And it supports this corner with a few rivets right through the body. And then up here there's a tension rod that supports this corner, and then of course the two flanges on either side in the back. So the location is set for the fuel tank, and what we can do now is we'll pull the side pod back off, and we can mount the fuel tank and have those in the car and set finally. Then we can pop the side pods back on and make sure everything still lines up. But these aren't quite ready to be final mounted yet. You can see there's this pocket cut out, and there's a vent that goes in here that it vents from behind the wheel area and then through this hole and then out. But what I need to do is cut this area, and there's a piece that goes in there. It's a carbon fiber bit, and I have yet to receive that from the factory, so I'm not going to cut the panel yet until I have that piece. And I don't want to mount this onto the body, or onto the chassis rather, until I have that done. So we're not quite ready to make those permanent yet. Still waiting on my radiator, but that's on its way. Wiring, of course, but there's not much to show there because it's just tedious work chasing down leads. But speaking of wiring, with the side pod on and temporarily mounted, I can begin fastening all of the actual harness into the car and making sure that that sits in its final place like it's supposed to. I also need to brush these ground points and then bolt the ground points to the chassis through. There's two in the front there, there's one in the back here on this bar. There's one over there that you can see, but I don't know if it actually gets used or not. And I think there's another ground point in the back. And I also have, so these two handles will pop the rear hatch, the rear clamshell, and these two handles under here pop the latches for the front clamshell. Let's see. You can see they go to these latches here on either side. I'm not just going to rely on those. I'm also going to get some arrow catches because I just want to have an extra assurance that the clamshells won't pop open at speed, especially in the rear where it'll just catch air like a parachute and fly off the car. Let's go around some of the projects I've been working on. So right here, let me move this out of the way. I'm getting the heater pipes. They've been run, however, the valve for the heater, which sits right down here, wasn't installed. So I have that installed now. And I have these rubber P-clips in, holding this tube in place. And behind it, I also put in some more of the second skin, basically to keep this from rattling around too much or just hitting the inside and making any noise. Again, more of an effort to keep the cabin quieter, even though it's going to be impossible to really keep it quiet. This stuff is it's a heat shield, also from DEI. This stuff is it's like a 3-inch diameter Velcro tube, or no, this might be just fixed. But what I'm going to do is wrap this around these heater tubes. Most importantly is here in the luggage bin, otherwise it just gets really hot in here, and as a side effect, since your arm rests on the panel here, your arm gets hot and your side gets hot, and it indirectly heats the cabin as well. But what I see many other builders neglect is forward of the luggage pod area here. This area is up and under the dash, and so I'm also going to use this heat shield to wrap all the way up to here in the heater box, and then all the way down through the luggage pod, and then also across the engine bay to protect it from engine bay heat and the headers and such. So this is a 3-foot length, which one length is good from about here in the valve, where the valve is located, to the box. Another kind of 2-foot length or so will cover the rest of the box, and then another 3-foot length should get you almost all the way across the back here, at least to where the water pipes will be on the motor, which you can see there. So I'm going to get this installed. I've also kind of tidied up the back of the car a little bit. You can see some of the gold heat shield that's been installed on the rear firewall. That is, I would say, fairly adequate at holding back radiant heat. It's only good for a radiant heat of 500 degrees or so. There is a better cloth that's very similar to this stuff, actually. If you look, this is a little bit thicker, but it's similar to this. It's silver in color, but it has not only a fiberglass layer, but a larger or a thicker insulating layer, which is good for up to like 2,000 degrees radiant heat, I believe. And I'm going to take a curtain of that stuff and put it kind of right there in front of the fuel tanks on either side, since the headers sit right behind them, and I'll use that to protect the fuel lines as well as the fuel tanks themselves from radiant heat. And hopefully that'll help stem any kind of vapor lock issues that some Ultimas are prone to having. I tidied up our shift cables here, as well as the e-brake cables. I got those mounted. Step around here. I started securing the wiring harness, and I'm going to do the bottom there as well now that the gold foil's installed. It's really coming along at the back of the car. The wiring back here is almost done, at least as far as the chassis harness goes. Up front is still a mess, although now I have the wiring harness secured on the dash bar, down the side here, and up front, and these will break through the firewall. I have the throttle sender mounted. I did this differently than the Ultima manual shows, because this bracket is different on the LS7 control kit that I received. In the manual it shows the same sender but a different bracket. So what I had done is I cut off like a triangle piece here, so it would match up with where the firewall will come down. And I put the 2 nut certs on this side, and then here I put another nut cert along with some spacer, a spacer underneath, which you can't see, to hold it laterally. I mean, it's pretty rigid, it's not going to move. You can see that the tolerances are fairly tight on the steering shaft, but with the pedal, see if I can do this without my arm in the way, has about 3.5 inches of travel. And we'll see if that's adequate enough for any kind of throttle control with 600 horsepower on tap. We had a huge team of people out yesterday helping put the car together, put the boots on, get the wiring harness done, get the engine disassembled and somewhat put back together. So my friend Jolly has removed the stock LS7 flywheel, and he's got the adapter plate and the new adapter flywheel clutch and pressure plate installed. However, it's not aligned because I thought I had an alignment tool, but I don't have a Porsche alignment tool. So that'll really have to wait until I get the alignment tool in. But he managed to remove the stock intake and the stock exhaust manifold. This awesome MSD Air Force intake is just resting right now because I can't turn the manifold around because of this oil pressure sender location on the stock valley plate. So this valley plate needs to be removed, and the steam pipe interferes with the back of the manifold when you turn it around. So this needs to be modified, and I have some more pieces in to deal with that. So we'll get this plate swapped out, get the steam pipe swapped out, and then this manifold can go on the motor and we can assemble the rest of it. So I'll show you the quick interference problems, if I can get this on here one-handed. For plastic, this thing is kind of heavy. Alright, so, well, that one's pretty obvious. It just doesn't clear because this needs to be removed. And then back here, this side of the steam pipe is actually okay because the intake is inset that way. However, on this side, it interferes. So we need to pull that off.